Warm greetings, everyone, and welcome to the session, Shock and Uneven Recovery, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on public revenues, as part of this year's Tax and Development Days. I'm Alexander Pick, acting head of the Tax Data and Statistical Analysis Unit at the OECD Center for Tax Policy and Administration, and I will be your master of ceremony for this event. We're honored to have speakers from governments, partner organizations, and the OECD with us today. We'll start with opening remarks from Ms. Seiko Saya, Deputy Director at the OECD Development Center, after which Ms. Manuel Modica from the OECD Center for Tax Policy and Administration will provide the context for today's discussion by showing tax revenue data for 2020 and 2021 for close to 130 countries that are included in the Global Revenue Statistics database. This will be followed by a discussion with 4 distinguished panelists from the African Union, Egypt, Jamaica, and the Maldives related to the impact and aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic on public revenues. After the panel discussion, we hope to have time for some questions from the audience for our panelists. And before we close, we will have concluding remarks from Ms. Anka Maria Sketi, Senior Policy Officer for Fiscal Policies and Budget Support at the European Commission. So we have a very packed agenda, and as a result of which I'm going to hand over straight away to Setsuko Saya, Deputy Director of the OECD Development Center, to provide some opening remarks. Over to you, Setsuko. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for your kind introduction. Distinguished guests and dear participants, I would like to extend my warm welcome to the session of the Tax and Development Days about the impact of COVID-19 on revenues and the subsequent recovery. I am Setsuko Saya, Deputy Director of the OECD Development Center. The OECD Development Center is a policy dialogue platform for 25 OECD member countries and 29 non-OECD member countries from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. It is my honor that we are the partner with the Center for Tax Policy and Administration in the Global Revenue Statistics Initiative. Taking this occasion, I would like to express my appreciation for the partners in the Global Revenue Statistics Partnership who have played a key role in expanding coverage. Now we have 127 countries in this initiative. The objective of this session is to learn from different corners of the globe about the impact of the COVID-19 on public finance, in particular tax systems in developing countries, and to learn how countries are responding to it and the extent to which they have recovered. We have observed by the global revenue statistics that the impact and the recovery process are very different depending on countries. One of the lessons learned is that domestic resource mobilization is as much a priority than ever. The session will be a great opportunity to hear from such a diverse and expert group. I would like to welcome speakers from Egypt, Jamaica, the Maldives, as well as the African Union and European Union. I hope to hear more countries and organizations during the Q&A sessions. Dear participants, I would like to ask your kind attention about the value of Global Revenue Statistics Initiative, which produces high-quality, harmonized revenue data. I am very sure that this is a valuable tool for policymakers worldwide because such data provides an essential starting point for peer learning between countries. This initiative would be extremely useful when policymakers design strategies and implement policies to enhance domestic resource mobilization. It would be grateful if countries which are not currently in global revenue statistics to join these initiatives. I'd just like to mention that there is no financial cost to participation. I would like to conclude my remarks by thanking the donors, in particular the European Union, who kindly support the Global Revenue Statistics Initiative. Without the European Union, events like today would not be possible. I wish you a successful event and look forward for a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tetsuko. And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Emmanuel Modica, who's going to set the scene for today's discussion by showing results from the Global Revenue Statistics Initiative for 2020 and 2021.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So today, in this presentation, I will briefly present the Global Revenue Statistics Initiative and provide a quick overview of how domestic revenue mobilization, and in particular, tax revenue, was affected by COVID-19 in the countries included in the Global Revenue Statistics Initiative. I will also discuss the extent to which revenue mobilization recovered from 2021 across the different regions. So here, the Global Revenue Statistics, what is it? It provides harmonized revenue statistics for 127 economies in Africa, Asia Pacific, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and the OECD. The data are available for free online. The initiatives provide critical data to inform tax policy reform and strategy to mobilize domestic revenue. It's also a useful tool to benchmark across country on a strictly comparable basis. The initiative contributes to international goals around domestic revenue mobilization, as it's set out in Sustainable Development Goal 17.1 and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. It also contributes to the SDG 17.19, which is on improving statistical capacity. So you see here 4 covers because the OECD produced 4 annual revenue statistic publication, and this in partnership with regional organizations in Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America and the Caribbean. We also organize a regular technical workshop and online seminar for participating countries, and we exchange on tax policy, on revenue trends, but also we share knowledge on how to produce high quality harmonized revenue statistics. So here you see all the partners that we've got for each of the publications. So our partners are involved in the production and validation of the data and publication, as well as writing special chapters on key policy areas. And again, I would like to thank them for our strong collaboration. So just going to discuss the COVID-19 impact on revenue. It's important to note that the Global Revenue Statistics produces 2 principal indicators of domestic revenue mobilization. This is the tax to GDP ratio and the tax structure. In this presentation, I'm concentrating on the tax to GDP ratio, and I will describe how they behave during the COVID-19 pandemic, focusing principally on 2020 and 2021. So the COVID-19, as we all know, has led to a great contraction in global GDP, but also in the GDP in all the regions. And the contraction in the global GDP was much larger during COVID than during the global finance crisis in 2008-2009. And we observed a major fall in tax revenue in 2020, and this is because of the decline of economic activity, but also the implementation of tax measures to support businesses and households. And because there is a much higher government spending and at the same time lower tax revenue, we observe a sharp increase in level of debt. But in 2021, there was a recovery that was driven by a rebound in consumption and investment, a stronger external demand, higher commodity prices, but the recovery is uneven across countries and regions. And we observed tax revenues that also recovered as a result of this rebound in economy, but to varying extent. And countries still are experiencing long-term consequences of the COVID, and they have to deal with new challenges. In the next slide, I will show you how this context was reflected in tax revenue trends. So here, in this slide, what you see is the tax to GDP ratio in 2021 and in 2019 for the economies that are included in the Global Revenue Statistics initiatives. We have grouped countries into the 4 regions with their regional average in 2021, that's the colored dot, and 2019, which are the gray triangles. First of all, you can observe there is a great dispersion of tax to GDP ratio across countries and region in 2021. So, for example, if we look at the blue dot, the OECD, the average tax to GDP ratio is 34.2. And in every country, the tax to GDP ratio is above 15%. And we've got also a small group of 6 countries recording tax to GDP ratio above 40%. In contrast, if we look on the right-hand side of that graph in green, you see the tax to GDP ratio for 30 African countries, which are in most cases much lower. Half of the country have tax to GDP ratio below 15%. However, there is a small group of 4 countries that have relatively high tax to GDP ratio. And on average, the Africa average stood at 15.6 in 2021. In the middle of the slide, you can see tax revenue level for Latin America and the Caribbean countries in red, and the average is 21.7, sorry. And Asia Pacific in light orange, the average tax to GDP ratio stood at 19.8%. When you compare to the level in 2019, tax revenue recovered to pre-pandemic levels in half of the countries shown here in 2021. In this slide, you see changes in tax to GDP ratio between 2020 and 2021. They are shown with the bars. And between 2019 and 2020, they are shown with the small gray triangles. And the revenue declined as a share of GDP in more than 3/4 of the country in Africa, in Latin America and the Caribbean, and Asia Pacific in 2020, versus about 4 countries out of 10 in the OECD. In contrast, in 2021, the tax to GDP ratio increased in more than 3/4 of countries in the OECD, Latin America and Caribbean, and Asia Pacific, and just under 2/3 of African countries. Here you see the trends between 2000 and 2021 for the average tax to GDP ratio for the different regions. You can observe an upward trajectory up to 2021. I mean, certainly from 2010 to 2021, and this was interrupted in 2020, but the COVID-19 pandemic, where you can see some drops. So, but despite the COVID-19 crisis, the taxes as a share of GDP increased in almost 3/4 of the country across the different regions between 2010 and 2021. In 2020, the decline, the year-on-year decline, ranged from 0.9 percentage point in Asia Pacific to 0.3 percentage point in Africa. The OECD, in contrast, has increased in 2020. In 2021, the tax to GDP ratio recovered from the COVID-19 shock in all the region on average, except in Africa, which remained stable relative to 2020. Here, this slide is showing the year-on-year changes in tax revenue as a share of GDP by tax type in 2020 and in 2021 for the different regional averages. So in all the region, except in the OECD, taxes on goods and services were the main drivers for the decrease in tax revenue as a share of GDP in 2020, and also the main driver for the increases in 2021. And what you observe is that value-added taxes has fluctuated strongly during the pandemic period, also in the Latin America and the Caribbean and Asia Pacific region. The biggest decline in 2020 came from revenue in other consumption taxes. There are taxes such as excise and import duties. Now, if we look at the OECD, this is a different story. It's revenue from income taxes and social security contributions that were more dynamic among OECD countries. You can say that personal income tax and social security contribution were the main drivers for the increase in 2020, while in 2021, it was the corporate income tax that was the main driver of the increase of tax revenue as a share of GDP in the OECD. Thank you for your attention. Now we are going to move on to our panel discussion, and for this I hand over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. It's great to see what the numbers are telling us from the Global Revenue Statistics database. And now we have an opportunity to hear much more about the experiences of countries and regional partners themselves during the pandemic. And for this, I'm delighted to be moving on to our panel discussion on the impact, recovery, and future implications of the COVID-19 pandemic as concerns revenues. And it's my great honor to introduce our 4 panelists today, each of whom I will ask one question to start us off. Our panelists today, as you can see on screen, are Dr. Patrick Alomo, Acting Head of Economic Policy and Sustainable Development at the African Union Commission, Ms. Mariam Malsa Lisham, Fiscal Analyst at the Ministry of Finance in the Maldives, Mrs. Andrea Gregory, former Director of Planning and Review at the Tax Administration Jamaica, and finally, Ms. Nariman Sahran, an economist with the Macro Fiscal Policy Unit in Egypt's Ministry of Finance. Patrick, please allow me to start with a question for you, our great friend and partner on revenue statistics in Africa. Patrick, in your view, what are the 3 main financing challenges that Africa faces in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and other recent global shocks? And with regard to tax policy in particular, what's the most important thing that African countries can do to overcome these? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And I would like truly to appreciate the invitation conveyed to the African Union Commission to be part of these important discussions. I think the OECD development, tax and development days, are speaking to the issues that we are confronted with today. And I would like to sincerely thank Emmanuel for the excellent presentation that highlighted, the challenges that we are all facing today. As you may well be aware, Alexander, we are navigating an extremely difficult situation since 2020 with the COVID-19 pandemic that started. And further to that, we are also faced with the effect of the geopolitical tensions that we see globally, and more specifically also speaking to issues that are relating to climate change that are also posing significant threat to our continent and reducing our ability to drive processes towards inclusive growth and sustainable development. With regards to the question that you just asked, and taking into consideration, that continental dynamics and the fact that we are in a very difficult situation today, the three main financing challenges that we are confronted with are related, first of all, to our inability, to raise more domestic resources, because domestic resource mobilization is at the center of all transformative processes in the world. And if you look at, the Monterrey Agreement and all the road that have led up to the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, you can see that it is conceived globally that there is a consensus about the fact that development should be centered through, domestic resource mobilization. So that is the first challenge. The second challenge is about, the limited access to African countries to capital. And when we speak about capital, we see here issues that are relating to, how the international rating system functions and how the international financial architecture also functions, because these are relating to the access, to low-cost capital that is essential to make the way towards, inclusive growth and sustainable development. Because if you look at the figures today, you will see that we are certainly the continent that is underserved in terms of access to capital. The third challenge is, relating to these two first challenges that I alluded to, is about the increased, level of debt of our countries. Because if you look at the debt level today, our debt level is estimated, at 65% for 2020, 2023, and it is expected to keep that level, till 2025 with that high level debt. And looking also at the dynamics of domestic debt, that is also increasing, and that is estimated at a level of 35% of GDP today. You can see that we are certainly confronted with one of the daunting challenges that we have seen since, the crisis of 2009. Because when you look at what is happening, you can see that we are absolutely in a position of not being able to finance in a sustainable way, the social services that are required to accelerate economic transformation and pave the way to inclusive growth and sustainable development. The data that we have, and thanks to the work that we are doing together, for revenue statistics, we can see, and Emmanuel just reminded that our capacity of raising taxes for about 33 of our member states is estimated at 15.6% of the GDP. If you compare that with other regions of the world, and Emmanuel rightly pointed it out, our level of domestic mobilization is absolutely below that range. So there is need for us to work for that and to make sure that we are addressing those issues. Responding to the second part of the question, which was about the policy that is needed, to deal with the three main challenges that I presented. Very simple. We need to make sure that we are able to build capable administrative systems, in the taxation side that is aimed at accelerating our capacities in terms of mobilizing, domestic resources. Saying this means that there is need for us to focus on, reforms that are going to capacitate our tax administrations to make sure that they are appropriately, equipped to deal with the new development of the international taxation system. Speaking to this also, because there I'm speaking to, the continental and national policies that needs to be addressed to make sure that we are able to accelerate our capacities in terms of domestic resource mobilization. And the work that we are already doing at the African Union Commission with the support of partners such as the African Tax Administration Forum and other Pan-African institutions is aimed at, strengthening our taxation systems to make sure that we are able to raise more revenues. But on the international side, and I would like to link this to the new developments that we have at the United Nations that are speaking to a fair, transparent, and inclusive international taxation system, we do believe that there is need for us to also insist on the need for a deep reform of the global taxation systems. And I truly liked the first presentation that was talking about carbon tax issues, and where it was said that there is need for capacities and need for actions at the global level to make sure that developing countries are able to take advantage of the immense resources that are available in the carbon tax market. Let me take an example. Africa today, and this thanks to the work that we are doing with the OECD Development Center, we know that we were able to increase our carbon stock to 13 billion kilotons from 2011 to 2020. Compared to other regions of the world, you can see that the carbon stock of those regions have reduced for about 11 million kilotons. So you can see that Africa has the potential of raising taxes, in the carbon tax, new deals that are built today. But unfortunately, when you look at the resources that the continent is receiving in that carbon tax, market, you will see that we are receiving extremely little amount of the resource that can be mobilized. So there is need for us to look at the structural, reforms of the international taxation system to make sure that at the United Nations, we are able to deal with the issues that, African countries and Global South countries are confronted with. One example is also about the issue of illicit financial flows that are depriving the continent for, about 90 billion US dollar per year, which is the equivalent of the international development assistance, replenishment that happened in 2020. So you can see that Africa actually can have the resources to sustainably finance its development. In addition to that, you will also include the 220 billion US dollar that are lost in terms of tax incentives. So you can see that if you combine just those two figures, you can see that reforming the international taxation system and making it work for real development, because as you said, we are gathered here today for the OECD Tax and Development Days. So our imperative is to reflect together and to see the options that are available to make sure that we build an international taxation system that is able to deal with the issues that African countries and Global South countries are confronted with. So this is what we are proposing with regards to the question that you just asked. I would like to stop here and hand back the floor to you, and I'm available if there is any other need for clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. That was fantastic. I will now like to ask a question to Moussa Lisham, our focal point from the Maldives. Moussa, the Maldives tax to GDP ratio rose rapidly in the years after the global financial crisis. How much was this progress affected by the pandemic? And what are the main 2 or 3 policies that the Maldives has implemented to support the subsequent recovery? Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. It is a great honor to be here today. So how much this progress was affected by the COVID-19 pandemic? Since the recovery from the global financial crisis up until 2019, we observed continuous growth in tax revenue throughout these years up until the COVID-19 pandemic. And after the crisis is when a lot of the broad-based taxes were introduced, which includes the formulation and implementation of major tax policies such as the GST and the BPT regime, the business profit tax regime. And this business profit tax regime was later replaced by the income tax regime, which basically includes taxation of, which includes personal income taxation as well. And these taxes, along with rate changes over these years, is what contributed to the rapid year-on-year growth in tax revenues, as well as tax to GDP ratio. I think most of us know that our economy as in the economy of Maldives, is quite reliant on the tourism industry, and so is our government revenue. And with the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, the halt in tourism activities led to a decline in tax revenue of 34% in 2020 compared to the previous year. And this is a much steeper decline relative to 2009, which is when the global financial crisis happened. And even the GDP declined by 35% in 2020. And hence, looking at tax to GDP ratio for 2020 might not be the best way of comparing the progress that we've made since GFC. And with the rollout of vaccines, ease in travel restrictions, coupled with the policies that we have implemented, we were able to reach the pre-pandemic level in terms of our tourism industry, as well as the tax revenue and tax to GDP in 2022. Then with regards to the policies, our main focus was on the recovery of the tourism industry, because our economy is mainly driven by the tourism industry, and it contributes to our government revenue significantly. So we introduced quarantine tourism, which led to improvement in tourism numbers. And other policies were introduced to reduce taxpayer burden during the COVID-19 period. Almost all the services were provided online by the Maldives Inland Revenue Authority, which included filing and payment of taxes as well. And there were deadline extensions that went hand in hand. In addition to that, there was a halt in the enforcement measures that were carried out by the Maldives Inland Revenue Authority, which was resumed in 2023. And as mentioned earlier, major taxes in the tourism industry, such as the GST and GRT, they are cyclical in nature, and it declined with the decline in the tourism sector. And there was not much intervention needed there, but for non-tax revenues, such as the tourism land rent for 2020, we actually deferred this rent payment to 2021, so that these resorts would not be hit too badly, because there was no way that they were having a lot of difficulties in managing their cash flow during this period, because tourism activities came to a halt for a few months. In addition to that, we also had loan repayment deferrals, as well as halt in imposition of fines, along with concessions. And another thing is that over the past few years, we've identified the importance of having and formulating sustainable revenue policies that can be sustained over the long run, the medium term and the long term. Hence, currently we are working on formulating the medium-term revenue strategy, and we do have a draft, and we're still working on finalizing everything, so that it would be a roadmap that would help us with regards to revenue policies, and also to ensure we've been trying to ensure that a whole of government approach is adopted in the implementation of revenue policies as well. And to ensure the fiscal sustainability, we increased the goods and services tax rate in January 2023. That is all from me for now.
Marcel, thank you very much, and thank you very much for joining us today. It's lovely to have you here. I'm now going to pass the floor to Andrea Gregory, who is joining us from Jamaica, who until very recently, Andrea was the focal point. So thank you very much for joining us today, Andrea. And I'm not sure I can see you yet online, but I hope that when you start to answer, your face will suddenly appear. But Andrea, Jamaica has one of the highest tax to GDP ratios across Latin America and the Caribbean. What were two of the biggest challenges that COVID-19 posed to Jamaica's revenues, and how can these revenues become more resilient to future shocks? Thank you very much.
Good morning, colleagues. Thanks for the invitation to be on the panel. Before I go directly into the challenges, though, let me just say that Jamaica is a lower middle income country with a per capita GDP of approximately $6,000. That was in 2022. And we'll see that the Jamaican economy continues to make progress even into 2024 and after 3 years of rapid post-pandemic recovery. Now, the Jamaican economy is primarily trade and service driven. And we find that tax administration Jamaica collects most of our domestic taxes, duties, and fees. This comes to approximately 67%. And it is responsible for maintaining the public trust in the Jamaican tax system. So I'm just trying to put everything into context here. So in March 2020, Jamaica recorded its first COVID case. And with that, the realization came that we're going to have massive economic shocks were to be expected. This is because approximately 50% of our country's revenues came from the tourism sector, and also recognizing the contributory role of remittances for several Jamaicans, and by extension, the country. Revenues were expected to be negatively impacted. The projected decline in government revenues at the time was going to be 18%. And the projected GDP was also expected to decline. So we were basically looking at a downturn in the economic outlook and a slowing down of the economy. Now, having said that, with the strict COVID protocols that were put in place, Jamaica's greatest challenges would be, TAJ's greatest challenges would be in our ability to pivot to more online virtual platforms and services, and also to be able to maintain a presence in the tax space, to continue an active engagement or communicate with our taxpayers, in that we have to continue to be seen as relevant to our taxpayers. We couldn't just drop off the scene. So those were our two biggest challenges. So as it relates to resilience, for resilience to the revenues, to ensure that it was collected, it meant for TAJ the ability for us to be able to rebound, to be robust and adaptable, to ensure, while we adhered to the GOJ's, the Government of Jamaica's protocols. So resilience for us took the form of developing or implementing new processes, including taking advantage of this digitalization. And, excuse me, as a result, the TAJ, our e-services was the main focus for the majority of our activities. And focusing on e-services, because of the lockdown, we had to go e. There wasn't face-to-face. So there were two main challenges there, in that not only the TAJ did we have to provide virtual options for taxpayers, we also had to ensure that we also had to change the taxpayer behavior to adapt to embrace these new changes, the new way of doing business, and also to get them to know how to use these services. So those were some of the challenges that we faced. But lucky for us, the advantage for TAJ was that all of our business clients were already filing tax returns online, and a significant percentage were also paying using the different e-options that we had started, because we already started on a process of digitalization, digital transformation. So during this period, we were able to heighten our promotion of online payment options. using both a mix of traditional and social media. To the extent that TAJ also, that we have a structured strategic and operational planning process in place, we had processes in place to make this transition less confusing for staff. We were able to clearly define and outline the roadmap, how we're going to accomplish some of these changes. So in addition to focusing on our e-services, what we did, we had to fast track some of the activities that we had in our strategic plan that we would have implemented further down the line. And some of these included being able to pivot quickly to flexible work arrangements. Why? We had already started looking on that process. We had already developed a draft document, so it was easy with the shutdowns to easily transition to a work from home situation for staff. You find that the face-to-face interactions with taxpayers and clients were suspended, and where possible, communication would be done via telephone, email, and appointment system, and also the use of web-based solutions. Online solutions, we enhanced some of our online solutions to develop a series of income tax tutorials in partnership with the Public Broadcasting Corporation of Jamaica. And these were aired on TAJ's YouTube channel, as well as the PBCJ TV channel. We had weekly interview series to provide general information to the taxpayer, and that was conducted via targeted radio stations. TAJ was also able to host its first webinar where tax preparers, accountants, micro and small businesses were targeted. We also expanded some online services, such as a driver's license fee and our tax compliance certificate auto renewal features. These were also added to our online suite. So because of these things, we were able to maintain a presence. We weren't forgotten. Persons were able to remember, yes, taxes is still important. In addition, what helped us also is that some time ago, we had this broad-based incentive regime that was introduced, aimed at, initially we were just giving tourism the tourism sector incentives, but this was broadened sometime after. So more small businesses, such as the business processing operations, became a part of this incentive. So this was able to offer us greater resilience within the economy and also for tax revenues. And since the time our revenues have continued to improve, corresponding with the economic growth. In 2023, revenues, we had a 24% in revenues compared to the previous year. And we have continued our positive performance, and our positive performance can be attributed really to the continuous enhancements that the authority is making in our taxpayer compliance programs, informed largely by what we do. We have a Know Your Taxpayer concept that we have implemented, and also our taxpayer risk management initiatives. And may I just add that during the period, we were able to conduct a TADAT assessment in 2021 to assess our progress from the previous one that was done in 2025, and the results came out pretty good. And that was the first TADAT assessment for during the COVID period. It was done virtual. So that's I hope I successfully answered your question.
Very much so. Thank you so much, Andrea, for your excellent answer. Last, I'm going to move on to Nariman Sakhan, our focal point in Egypt. Nariman, COVID-19 was one of a number of major shocks to Egypt's economy in recent years. What 2 or 3 reforms to tax policy and administration has Egypt implemented since 2020 to ensure revenues recover and that progress in domestic revenue mobilization continues? Thank you very much, Nariman, for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing your answer.
Thank you so much for your question. Good morning or good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to participate in this session. I would like to start by stating that Egypt realizes the importance of domestic revenue mobilization in creating fiscal space or facilitating debt reduction. And this is especially after the continuous external shocks that we have been facing since 2019. So in light of this, Egypt developed and has been continuously working on its medium-term revenue strategy. The strategy aims to increase tax to GDP ratio by around 0.5% every year, thus increasing the ratio by 2% in 4 years. And this is to be achieved through both implementing the needed tax policies as well as implementing tax administrative measures. So I will shed some light today on the recent tax policies and the administrative measures that Egypt recently adopted to mobilize its domestic revenues. First, there is no denying that the administrative measures in Egypt are playing a prominent role even relative to tax policies. This is because we believe that the country's best tax policies become worth so little if they cannot be well administered. And because of this, Egypt launched its electronic invoice system for tax collection in fiscal year 2020 that aims to build a strong digital infrastructure to aid tax compliance and reduce tax evasion. This is through limiting the taxpayer's regular friction with tax officials, thus eliminating any corrupt practices such as negotiations between taxpayers and tax officials. And the main target behind these administrative efforts is to widen the tax base and cover the informal economy. And adding on this, another important tax policy that we are currently working on to further widen the tax base is reaping any tax exemptions given to state-owned enterprises. This is because tax exemptions, despite of their popularity for investment promotion, and especially in developing countries, they usually tend to complicate the tax system and facilitate evasion. So we are working on removing tax exemptions not only to mobilize domestic revenues, but rather also to level the playing field for the private sector. So we aim to attract investments not through offering exemptions, but through availing a more competitive business environment and leave more room for the private sector to operate. And thirdly, and finally, the Egyptian Tax Authority has been very proactive in addressing the tax challenges arising from digitalization of the economy. So in light of this, the Egyptian Tax Authority recently published the value-added tax guidelines for digital services and other remote services provided by non-residents. The guidelines outline the value-added tax obligations for non-resident vendors who render digital or remote services to customers in Egypt through various platforms, including websites, social media stores, and applications. And guidelines on e-commerce in general are intended to ensure fairness and consistency in taxation of such services. And most importantly, it aims to further widen the tax base and cover the informal economy. So I would like to conclude by reiterating that this is the primary goal of all the measures I previously mentioned, whether through policies or administrative measures. Our target as Ministry of Finance is to have a tax base that is quite close to the potential taxpayers in the economy. And I would like to stop here and thank you for your attention. Leave the floor for any questions. Thank you.
Nariman, thank you so much. And thank you to all our panelists for excellent interventions. Have all been fascinating and all touched on a broad range of questions, which has been excellent. I would also like to say a big thank you to the people who've left questions in the chat box. So we have questions from our friend Wilfred Puba from Gabon, as well as from Hassan Menze, and also from Claudio. Unfortunately, we are very low on time, so I'm afraid I'm just going to choose one question, and that'll be Hassan's, because it's so close to what Patrick was saying at the start. So, Patrick, Hassan's question is that given the current financing challenges that African countries are facing, and the huge impact of the the pandemic on their economies, what is your opinion of debt relief measures? What measures could be taken to alleviate the debt pressures that you mentioned during your intervention? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we can think about two sets of policies. The first is to make sure that in the short run, we are able to, provide ample opportunity, for, countries that are in debt distress to be able to sustainably navigate the turbulent environment in which they are. Just a little example, because when you look at the debt service for African countries, for instance, you can see that it is offsetting, it is taking away 2/3 of the domestic resource that we are mobilizing, which is extremely huge. And at the same time, you are supposed to be paying for social services that are relating to health, to education, and to other infrastructure needs that we are faced with. And secondly, in the long run, it is important that, we do really think about, relooking at the international context of the debt architecture, because we strongly believe that there is an opportunity to work together, to make sure that we are able to address, those challenges in the long run. Having said this, it also speaks to the issue of, linking future debt to productive transformation, because if we are contracting debt, as it was the case in the COVID-19 pandemic, to pay for vaccines, I don't know how you are paying back that kind of resource, those kind of resources that are producing nothing. It is true that the health expectation is high at the moment that you are contracting the debt and that you are vaccinating your populations. But unfortunately, vaccines are not producing, cash resources per se in the interim period where you are supposed to pay back the debt. So it is important to make sure that we are able to link debt with productive transformation processes that are going to be able to raise revenues and to pay back debt in a sustainable manner. And this speaks to the issue of industrialization, because it is imperative that we work as African countries and even global South countries to make sure that we are able to increase our capacities in terms of participation in the domestic market and participation in the international markets. Just a last example, we have developed the African Continental Free Trade Area, which today is a market of approximately 1.3 billion people, with an expectation of nearly 2.7 billion people in just 2 decades as we speak today. So you can see that if we are able to align our domestic resource mobilization policies, link debt with productive transformation, and make sure that African countries are able to access capital. And I do think that we can speak about what we are doing together with the OECD Development Center. We are working on establishing an African virtual investment platform that will be, a continental platform to provide information on the real investment opportunities, and also de-risking the perception that, investor have on the continent. Because as we usually say, it is absolutely easier for an investor to invest in the extractive or in the extraction of African resources, but it is extremely difficult to see investors investing in producing and transforming African resources within the continent to create jobs, to create growth, and to deal with issues of poverty, inequalities, to build a sustainable society where everyone is able to, to see himself, moving in the, spheres of the social, context. So this is how we perceive, the debt issue, short-term responses, but also long-term responses. And it speaks to the overall reform of the global financial architecture, as I said, reform of the World Bank, the lending mechanism, reform of the, the lending mechanism of the International Monetary Fund that are part of that system, that is governing the world today. So we see it at the continental level with, domestic policies that needs to be aligned to, productive transformation and development, but also at the international level, we are looking for, an accommodating international environment that is providing the space for, global South countries to access capital. Thank you. Thank
you very much, Patrick. I'm extremely sad to say that this brings an end to an excellent panel discussion. Thank you to our panelists again and for the questions that came in. I'm sorry we couldn't get them all. Unfortunately, fortunately, we are not closing quite yet, because I now hand over to Anke Maria Sigeti, Senior Policy Officer for Fiscal Policies and Budget Support at the European Commission, to say a few words in conclusion of this event. Anke Maria, over to you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Alexander, and to the panelists for this great session and for having me here. I really enjoyed a lot, very eloquent interventions on continental and national level, difficulties, challenges, but also successes. So really very insightful. So I just want to talk a bit about what we do at the EU when it comes to supporting domestic revenue mobilization efforts of our partner countries. So this is really a fundamental part of our international tax good governance agenda, and particularly in the context of the COVID-19 recovery. Our support to DRM takes shape through global, regional, but also bilateral partnership, and we collaborate currently with over 60 countries, and we provide technical assistance, capacity building, but also budget support operation, which is a very peculiar implementation modality of ours. We follow the EU Collect More, Spend Better approach, and this has been complemented by the Declaration 2025 of the Addis Tax Initiative. And we heard actually reference to Addis Ababa Action Agenda. This is a baby of this agenda, and we internalize it. It has been endorsed by the Union, and it really puts an emphasis on fair tax systems and the fight against illicit financial flows. So in rolling out the strategies, we have forged long-standing partnerships with multilaterals and including with the OECD. So I chose to talk a bit about our relationship with the OECD, both at global level and then at a regional level. So globally, we are engaging in addressing domestic tax base erosion and profit shifting, so basically tax avoidance, through the support of supporting the G20 OECD BEPS action plan. But we also fund the efforts of Global Forum Transparency and Exchange of Information for tax purposes. So in what regards cooperation in tax transparency. And these endeavors are, of course, at domestic level, but also internationally, looking at combating illicit financial flows. When we look at regional level, I chose to talk about Africa also because the financing of the revenue statistics comes through a regional envelope, through our Africa envelope. So I'm pleased to reiterate our support to the OECD Africa partnership, which is actually in the context of our strengthened EU-OECD cooperation on Africa. I would mention just a few milestone framework documents like the OECD Africa strategy adopted in 2022, followed by a program of work for Africa 2023-2026, and then by a memorandum of understanding signed between the two organizations to effectively deliver of this program of work. We're also very enthusiastic about the establishment of a new OECD European Commission strategic dialogue with a specific point focused on the partnership with Africa. So coming back to DRM, the European Union commitment to supporting African partners in DRM is a vital part of our shared commitment with the European Union-African Union partnership and the delivery of the Global Gateway Africa-Europe Investment Package. This is really at the heart of our actions. These efforts are also in line with joint commitments made at the EU-AU summit in February 22, and there is really a very close follow-up of these commitments. I really have the pleasure to announce that we are rolling out a new Team Europe initiative together with 4 member states, so European Commission, France, Finland, Sweden, and Germany. This Team Europe initiative is addressing illicit financial flows. It is to be launched this year, and it has an envelope of over 400 million euros. So it will look at all facets of illicit financial flow. It is a great endeavor, and we are happy to have our partners supporting it. But let me touch a word on the role of revenue statistic, because it's all about this in this session. So we have been hearing that reliable, high quality, and accessible data and statistics are essential, and I cannot agree more than it's true. This is true across all areas of cooperation. So the EU is proud to support the Revenue Statistic Initiative and the yearly publication. How they help us, they simply provide valuable insights into the revenue collection, tax systems of various countries, as we could see in the presentation in the beginning, and they allow us to support initiatives that enhance DRM in partner countries. At the other part of the spectrum, they contribute to the monitoring of commitments, and this is the case for our own project, but also on the follow-up of joint commitments which we took under the Addis Tax Initiative Declaration 2025. So equally, our development and developing partners are using the revenue statistic to identify areas for improvement, benchmark their tax revenue, as we heard, based on comparable data, evaluate tax policy, and eventually make more accurate revenue projection for effective policy making. This is really so important. So let me just conclude by saying that our support for the revenue statistic is a testament to our commitment to fostering sustainable development and enhancing the effectiveness of DRM efforts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you very much for seeing us home. It's lovely to hear from you, and I'm very grateful to everyone who has stayed until the end of this session. Before I go, I should just say a big thank you, of course, to our donors who you see there on the screen. These include, of course, the European Union, but also the governments of Germany, Ireland, Japan, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom.